It's your boy Luke here for our fades and sleepers for this week's Sony Open. These players are going to be the most overhyped going into this week, my fades, and of course, some of the diamonds in the rough this week being a little bit overlooked by the masses, my sleeper picks. These are going to be especially helpful for some of the large field GPP type of contests. Of course, my fades, some of the people I think you should be getting some leverage off, maybe not even playing at all, and of course my sleeper picks, some of those low-owned options, you can mix in 15 to 20% of your lineups and really get some high upside. So with that being said, let's hop right on into it with our fades and sleepers for this week. All right, getting right into it. First off, with our number one fade, that is going to be Hideki Matsuyama at $10,600. He's somebody being owned right around 15% by the field right now. I could see him coming in just a little bit higher than that come tomorrow evening. He's somebody who the casual fans know about. He went out, won the Masters. He's also the second most expensive player on the board here. The reason why his ownership's a little bit tempered is he's not a great course fit. This is a course that, while it does reward great iron play, you also have to be a very good putter. You routinely see a winning score right around 25 under par, and this is at a par 70. So you're not getting those guaranteed birdies on 4 par 5s or anything like that. Only have 2 in play this week. They also have some relatively long par 3s. So you really have to do a lot of your scoring at these par 4 type of holes. So not only are you looking at accurate drivers of the golf ball, people that can get themselves plenty of birdie looks, but also ones that can cash in. So Hideki Matsuyama, negative 0.24 shots gained putting Bermuda per round is not what we're looking for. And in the recent form, even though I don't think it's as important this week, hell, Hideki Matsuyama is only at 103 because his win was at an event without shots gained metrics. So again, we don't want to look into that too much. But aside from the win, aside from the second place finish back there a few months ago in the late end of 2021, really didn't do all that much. So Hideki Matsuyama, while he was a core play last week, there's just better venues for his type of game, and I'll be looking to pivot elsewhere up to either Cam Smith, even a Webb Simpson, and I might even mix in a Sungjae Im to my player pool. It'll depend on how much exposure we can get to a Sungjae Im. If I can get to right around the 20% mark, at least close to where the field's at, that'll be worth it. If I can only fit in 10 to 15%, might full on fade. Either way, though, Webb Simpson and Cameron Smith, great pivots off Hideki Matsuyama, and that's why he finds himself as my number one fade. At number 2, we have Abraham Answer, who looked horrible last week at the Tournament of Champions. He was a fade for us. That shouldn't be a surprise. He's one of the shorter hitters on the PGA Tour. Also not great on Bermuda grass. So last week, not only was he atrocious with the off-the-tee play, also didn't really have his irons, he lost a ton of strokes putting. We're also dealing with very grainy Bermuda grass greens here at Waialae Country Club. And you can see for his career, he also just doesn't gain on Bermuda grass. And that's despite being one of the best putters on the PGA Tour on pretty much every other surface. So for me, Abraham Answer, though it is a short track, which plays into his off-the-tee game, he is relatively short, a little bit more of an accuracy guy there. I just don't like the putting metrics. I especially don't like what I saw last week where he had an atrocious week from the shots gained metrics there. And at nearly 15% ownership, just like Hideki Matsuyama, also going to be a fade for me here at Waialae. A couple people you could pivot to is, first off, Kevin Na, who's going to be a sleeper pick we talk about here in a second, or of course the chalk, Corey Connors. Corey Connors is chalk worth eating this week. He has the very good off the tee game here, and historically, he gains strokes on these greens. In fact, he's the 8th best putter at Waialae in all of this field for his course history. So I'm not a huge course history guy to begin with, but when you start to see that type of trend for a golfer, particularly a guy like Corey Connors, who's usually atrocious on Bermuda grass, starts to have a little bit of credence, or at least partial credence there, right? He's at least liking the greens, understands the looks here, has them down pat. So Abraham Answer, as much as I like him on some of these other type of tracks, particularly short bent grass tracks, just on a Bermuda track where we have so many good options around him, not going to be a priority. And finally, our last sleeper for this week is going to be Matt Jones here at $8,400. Last week, everything went right for him. Had his best around the green performance ever, gained 6 strokes on the greens, and gained a ton off the tee. He lost strokes on approach and almost took down that golf tournament at 35 under par. He really had the outlier of all outliers with all parts of his game. And if there's anything we know about Matt Jones, is he's no stranger to going out, having a pop performance, and completely disappearing. For evidence of that, take a look at his win at the Honda Classic. I was there, I was watching him in person all 4 days, just absolutely in control of his game, much like what we saw this weekend. Really looked infallible. After that, missed 10 straight cuts. Hadn't finished in the top 50 for a few months at a time there. Had one decent performance in the fall there, and that's about it. Matt Jones just completely fell off the earth, revived himself there at the Tournament of Champions, and I expect him to go right back to the ceiling. To the basement of this field. Just somebody who I'm not prioritizing. In terms of his shots gained metrics, let's go ahead and hop into it. Right around 15% owned as well here. And in terms of Matt Jones's game, there is a lot to be concerned about. So first and foremost, let's get over here to the summary. He loses strokes on approach, particularly over his last 24 rounds, and that's where he's played some of his best golf of late. If you take a look at the whole 2021 season, losing 0.2 strokes on approach per round. Not what you want to see there. Also, in terms of his putting, you see he's a slate positive there, but a little bit worse on Bermuda grass. So even though he has been good on Bermuda grass of late, and he gained 6 strokes last week, for his career, not really that strong of a putter on the surface. Much stronger on bent grass and POA. We go over to the driving statistics. This is where you really start to get worried. First and foremost, driving distance, pretty good, right? 37th in the world, which for him last week was extremely valuable. We had a relatively long golf course at 7,500 yards, and even though there's a lot of elevation in play, the longer you hit it, the more multiplied that distance gets. A lot more carry time, just more force, more distance you can get with rollout, everything like that. So he saw a huge advantage last week with that distance. Fortunately, can't hit a fairway for his life. At the Tournament of Champions as well, Kapalua has the largest fairways on tour, so he got away with that. Here at Waialae, some of the smallest fairways we'll find on the entire year. In fact, some years it's the hardest to hit fairways on all of the PGA Tour, and even though not many people are going to hit them to begin with, he could put himself in some bad situations. There's quite a few trees in play here, and though it does take a really awry shot to get into them, he's that inaccurate of a driver. That's more than capable of him to get into that kind of stuff. So $8,400, and again, nearly 16% expected ownership. I'd much rather pivot to somebody like a Russell Henley, who I have as a core play this week, right? Much safer, still has the accuracy off the tee, same type of iron play as a Matt Jones, and also a much better putter on Bermuda grass. So really like that type of pivot. You can go to Maverick McNeely as well. I'll probably have him in my final player pool come tonight. He's $8,300. Great in terms of his putting. You can see on Bermuda grass, it's not his favorite surface, but is typically a decent putter. The difference here is he's much lower owned. He's cheaper. He's also much more stout off the tee. Maverick McNeely, a top 30 player in the world with shots gained off the tee in the second half of 2021, just was absolutely striping it. And he also gained a quarter of a stroke per round on approach during that stretch. That's why we saw him really assert himself for the first time on the PGA Tour at an event other than Pebble Beach. Obviously played well there multiple times in his career, but last year started to show up at some of these regular tour events. So do you like Maverick McNeely there as well as a pivot? And now for our sleeper picks. These are the guys being a little bit overlooked this week and could give you guys some good leverage for some of your large field tournaments. First off, we're going to start with Kevin Na, who last week was actually one of the higher owned options down low. Obviously had a very solid week of ball striking on a golf course that didn't really suit his game. So now that we head to Waialae, a shorter track, and anytime we get Kevin Na on one of these shorter tracks, he's live to not just contend, but of course take the whole thing down. So even though he's $9,900, a lot more expensive than we're used to seeing him here, he is just an absolutely perfect course fit. On Bermuda grass, he's his usual self with the putter. It's not his best surface, but if you're gaining nearly half a stroke per round on Bermuda, that is definitely going to get the job done. And the thing we really have to like about a Kevin Na, and we'll go to the advanced metrics tab here to go and show you guys this, is that not only has he been putting well of late, you guys can see 0.4 shots gained per round, right about what we're used to seeing from him on Bermuda anyways. If we go over to some of these approach stats, is where he starts to pop. Look at this 150 to 175 category, number 11 on tour, with the wedges from 125 to 150, top 37 on the entire tour. Of course, an absolute wizard with the scrambling, but at this golf course, even with his relative lack of length, he's very often going to be in this 150 to 175 or 125 to 150 range. And that's where he makes his hay. He makes a ton of putts on this surface. So the fact that he's the lowest owned of these stud tier options, to me, makes him a slam dunk play here. At 13.1%, I'm likely to get closer to 35, maybe even 40% ownership on a Kevin Na. We'll have to see what his final ownership number comes in at, but one of my favorite plays here for this week. I'm going to our next play being Harris English, who was our one dud last week. Of my core plays, he was the one who finished the lowest on the board, and he got a significant price hike this week, which, of course, with this field strength, you would expect him to go up in price, but I don't expect many people to be on him. You can see his projected ownership right now is at 10.8%, but if we go off a course fit, just trying to match players in their courses, Harris English is going to be one of the best fits here. So let's hop over to the advanced metrics, much like what we did here with Kevin Na. And you guys can see over here, first and foremost, of late, has not been his usual self. First and foremost, the putting has been a negative. If you guys know anything about Harris English's game, he's typically one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. Now, back when he had to change his putter, if you guys remember, right before the Ryder Cup, he was forced to change his putter grip, which wouldn't be an issue for most golfers, except he had been using that for 14 years. And I expressed legit concerns that he could see a little bit of fall off. You know, when you get used to something, it could be as much mental as it is physical with the Harris English. You're going to see a little bit of adjustment. Now, the first week back from that looked horrible. Couldn't gain strokes and figured it out after about a month, though. It was back to his usual self, but for the last 24 measured rounds, has fallen back into that slump. Fortunately for him, on Bermuda grass, he gains nearly half a stroke per round, making him one of the best players in this field, and has still at least been gaining around the green and been neutral with his approach play. Of course, he's been atrocious with the off-the-tee play, but one thing we can count on from a Harris English is, first off, pretty steady play across the board for the whole 2021 year, gained across all four major statistical categories. Plus, with his distance off the tee and his relatively straight ball flight, he's usually one of the best ball strikers week in and week out. So even though we haven't seen his best play of late, I do expect a huge rebound here. Again, typically the shots gained metrics for Harris English, much better than what we're seeing on the screen here. Let's look at some of the other stats for Harris. On par 4s, right about tour average. Exceptional on long par 3s, which we are definitely going to have our fair share of this week. His approach play has, of course, not been what we're looking for, especially from some of those shorter ranges. From 175 to 200, he at the very least shines there, but not going to have very many shots from that range this week. Something else that is a little bit underrated from a Harris English is going to be his scrambling game. Usually he doesn't put himself in many bad situations because his approach play, again, one of the more consistent marks on the tour. But when he has to get up and down, he is skilled at doing so. And you can see that with his scrambling rate over there on the right. So with all of that being said, going to be very low owned here at 10.8%. And with his long-term pedigree, somebody who, if he ends up turning it around this week, could break the slate at single-digit ownership. And now, finally, our last sleeper pick for this week is going to be Billy Horschel here at $8,700. And if we're looking at any type of a shots gained metrics, not going to be popping off the board. But much like a Harris English, we are buying back in on the long-term pedigree. I think a lot of people are putting too much stock into what we saw last week. I mean, particularly with somebody like a Harris English, we got to remember we haven't seen these guys, some of them for 3-4 months at a time. So Billy Horschel, even though he hasn't been playing his best golf, is somebody who has a great course fit here. And let's dive into some of the shots gained metrics here. First and foremost, we know that Billy Horschel, not the best off the tee player, right? He's gone a little bit longer over the years. In fact, he's actually just above tour average right now, but still wildly inaccurate. He's always been good with some of his short wedges and an absolute specialist on Bermuda grass. You can see that over here, getting a third of a stroke per round on Bermuda. If we dive into some of the advanced metrics, on par 4s, hasn't been his best of late, but for his career, is above average on par 4 scoring compared to the PGA Tour Pro. Of late, has been a little bit better with those wedges, right? He's always, let's say, a feel shot specialist. He really has those in-between type wedges down. So that's why you see him excelling from that 50 to 125 yard category. Been about just average with the rest of the approach category buckets there, which isn't really going to sway him one way or the other. But the putting inside 5 feet, number one, right? That's just because he hasn't missed any putts within 5 feet. And to do that over a 24 round period isn't all that impressive, right? There's usually going to be a few people in every field that's going out and doing that. So Either way, the whole thing here with Horschel is buying back in as a long-term pedigree. He for sure doesn't look like a solid play of late, but if you take a look at his numbers from last week, his approach numbers were a lot better than people would expect. He gained 2.5 strokes on approach at the Tournament of Champions, and while he didn't have his best putting week, if he can turn it around on Bermuda grass, his best surface on tour, could be in for a huge week here. So $8,700, approaching single-digit ownership, going to be one of my favorite sleepers. That's all I've got for this week's fades and sleeper picks. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments, first off, who your biggest fade for this week is, and of course, your favorite sleeper pick. I always love to hear from you guys. Let's go ahead and get some debate going down in those comments. We're going to have the live stream this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're watching this after then, the replay will be up on my channel. But on there, we're going to be covering the weather, my player poll, any live questions that you guys have for me down in the live chat, and ownership, game theory, just everything you guys need to know for tomorrow. There hasn't been that much that has changed, but if you're playing Showdown, anything that's a little bit more strategic, going over that weather, going over some of those ownership numbers, going to be extremely valuable. So I will put a link down in the description to that. So make sure you guys set a reminder, make sure you stop on by around 7, and I'll see you guys then.